My daughter Ella sat quietly at the edge of the couch, her legs swinging above the floor, eyes glowing with anticipation. Around her cousins were tearing through wrapping paper, squealing with laughter, waving their new treasures around. One held up a sparkling pink tablet. Another danced with excitement over a remote-controlled drone. The whole room was alive with joy, but Ella just sat there waiting, certain her turn was coming. She wore the kind of smile only a child who truly believes in love could wear, patient, certain, open-hearted. In her world, grandmas give gifts wrapped in ribbons and tagged with your name. No exceptions. I kept scanning the pile beneath the towering tree, my gaze darting from bag to box. Her name had to be there, but when the final package was handed out and she still sat there empty-handed, she glanced up at me and whispered, "Did Grandma forget me?" I turned to Margot, my mother-in-law, and asked in a voice as soft as I could make it, "Was there maybe one more? Maybe it got misplaced?" She didn't blink, didn't pause. "She's not really family," Margot said, like she was commenting on the weather she's adopted. "It's different." Ella heard every word. She didn't burst into tears, not immediately. She just gave this small, almost imperceptible nod, like something invisible had just clicked into place. Then she looked at her hands and folded them in her lap as if trying to take up less space in the world. I felt like all the air had been sucked from the room. My lips parted, but no sound came. I wanted to defend her, to say something fierce, but I froze. And what crushed me even more was the silence, the kind that doesn't come from shock but from choice. The cousins exchanged uneasy glances. Jenna, my sister-in-law, suddenly became very busy with a trash bag, avoiding eye contact. And Caleb. My husband sat beside me, fists clenched, jaw tight, eyes locked on Margot. But even he didn't speak. We stayed. We went through the dinner as if it were any other holiday night. Ella didn't mention it again. That evening, once we were back in the quiet of the guest room, Caleb opened the bottom drawer of his suitcase and pulled out a manila envelope. I looked at him. "I brought it in case she crossed a line," he said, voice steady. "I was hoping I wouldn't need it." Then, without another word, he zipped his coat folder in hand and walked out of the house alone sometime past midnight. I didn't ask what he planned to do. I didn't need to. Whatever was inside that envelope, whatever he said at her door that night, Margot didn't smile the next morning. And she never ever called Ella not family again. And if this story has stirred something in you, if you've ever watched someone you love be made to feel like they didn't belong, then maybe you understand why I'm sharing this now. Not for pity, not even for resolution, but because stories like this deserve to be spoken aloud, not hidden in the quiet corners of family gatherings. If it resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you took a second to like the video or subscribe to this channel. It helps these kinds of truths reach someone else who might need to hear it. Now back to where it began. Way. It all happened last Christmas. The kind of holiday you see in commercials. Snowfall just right, candles flickering in every window, and the whole family dressed in color-coordinated pajamas, like they were born for the photo op. It was meant to be picture perfect. The fireplace crackled like clockwork. Cider simmered on the stove, and the house, Margot's house, was a vision straight out of a magazine. Every surface had been carefully curated, name tags on the place settings, ornaments that matched the garland, even napkins folded into miniature trees sitting beside a handwritten dinner menu. Margot, my mother-in-law, doesn't do halfway. Her Pinterest boards aren't just inspiration, they're blueprints, and her brand of hospitality is polished to a fault. But beneath the sparkle, there's a strict belief system, one that quietly separates people into ours and others. She clings to tradition like it's armor, and deviation isn't taken lightly. Caleb and I have been married for a decade. We met in our junior year of college. He was the quiet, observant type who rarely interrupted but always noticed. He had that calm depth that made you feel seen, even in silence. When I fell for him, I fell hard, not just for the man he was, but for the kind of father I believed he would become. That faith carried me through the years that followed. We spent a long time trying to become parents. Years of hope, heartbreak, and too many nights sitting in the dark, holding hands, but saying nothing. 4 miscarriages, 2 failed rounds of IVF, a series of losses that hollowed us out and then forced us to find a different kind of strength. Eventually, we stopped asking why us and started asking what now. That's when we found Ella. She wasn't a second best option, she was everything. We didn't know we were waiting for. We met her through a local agency, and from the first time she wrapped her little fingers around mine during a walk through the city park, I felt it, that sudden, undeniable certainty. She was 5, she had a teddy bear named Leo, and an imagination that sparkled in every sentence. From the day we brought her home, she became part of our rhythm. She called Caleb Dad without prompting. She started calling me Mom one night while I was brushing her hair, and I nearly broke down on the bathroom floor. Ella has a lightness about her that lifts the energy in any room. She talks to squirrels like they're old friends and paints animals with such emotion, it stops you in your tracks. She's the kind of child who claps for others, even when she's the one being overlooked. And sadly, she's had more practice at that than she should. When we introduced her to Margot, the reception was civil. Not cruel, not warm, just cold enough to notice Margot didn't insult her. She didn't say anything overt, but she also didn't ask her favorite color, didn't remember her birthday, didn't crouch down to speak to her like she did with our nieces and nephews. It was all polite distance. I told myself it would change, that she needed time. Caleb wasn't as convinced he knows his mother. He's lived through her subtle judgments his whole life, but for Ella's sake, we agreed to give her that time. So when the invitation came, Margot's big Christmas gathering, her self-declared Yuletide extravaganza, we said yes. We packed the car with gift snacks, a dozen handmade cards Ella had crafted for her cousins, and one carefully ironed red velvet dress. She picked it herself, said she wanted to look grown-up but still magical. The drive to North Carolina took 6 hours, and Ella sang through most of it. Her bear Leo buckled into the seat beside her. At one point, I looked back and saw her humming along to Jingle Bell Rock, eyes sparkling with hope, and I thought, this year will be different. This year she'll feel it. She'll feel like she belongs. When we arrived, the house was brimming with sound dogs, barking kids darting through rooms, the smell of spiced ham and cinnamon hanging in the air. Ella ran straight into the chaos like she'd been there 1,000 times. She hugged Jenna. She tried to hug Margot, too. Margot gave her a polite pat on the head like she was greeting someone else's child at church. I swallowed that moment, smiled, told myself it didn't mean anything. We kept busy. I helped Margot arrange the hors d'oeuvres tray, 6 kinds of cheese each with its own labeled chalkboard stick. Caleb chased the younger kids around the backyard, letting them pile on top of him in the leaf piles. Ella handed out reindeer-shaped cookies she'd baked and decorated herself. Everything looked normal on the outside, almost perfect if you squinted past the edges. But the next morning, gift time told a different story. It was tradition at Margot's after breakfast. The children would sit in a perfect circle beneath the 12-foot tree in the grand foyer, and Margot would pass out gifts, one at a time, like a ceremony. She made a whole production out of it. Color-coded wrapping paper, gift tags in calligraphy, Christmas music playing softly in the background. Ella was practically vibrating with excitement. She whispered to me, "I think mine's the purple one with the snowman." I smiled and nodded. Even though I hadn't seen her name on a single package, I convinced myself it was hidden. Maybe Margot had tucked it away for a surprise reveal. Maybe she saved hers for last. Then the gifts began. Laughter erupted. Ribbons flew one by one. Every cousin tore into a toy or a gadget or a new winter coat. Ella clapped for each of them, said wow, every time someone held something up. And slowly the pile disappeared. 10 gifts left. Then 5, then 2, then 1. None for Ella. I felt her lean into me just slightly. Then she whispered softer this time. "Did Grandma forget mine?" I looked around like I was still searching. Maybe it's under something I said already, knowing it wasn't. And just like that, the hope in her eyes flickered. What came next is what I already told you, the question. The silence. The statement from Margot that drew a line. No gift could ever erase. "She's not really family," she said, and everything we had hoped would bloom that year, withered in that single breath. That moment wasn't just a tradition. It was the tradition. The crown jewel of Margot's carefully choreographed Christmas. She orchestrated it with military precision. 12-foot tree, glittering with coordinated ornaments, presents, arranged not just by name, but by wrapping paper theme. There were silver and blue gifts for the boys, rose gold and lilac for the girls. Each child was called forward one at a time, like stars in a holiday pageant. She even had a playlist of soft instrumentals humming in the background, as if the music had to match the color palette. Ella sat cross-legged on the plush rug, hands clasped in her lap, practically levitating with excitement. Her eyes kept flicking from the tree back to me, a hopeful rhythm. I think mine's the purple one with the snowman sticker. She whispered, her voice like a secret she was afraid to say too loudly, just in case it vanished. I nodded and gave her a smile, even though I hadn't seen her name on any tag. That hollow twist in my gut tightened, but I forced myself to believe. Maybe her gift was tucked in the back. Maybe Margot had hidden it behind the larger boxes for dramatic effect. Maybe it had been left in the guest room by mistake. There had to be something. The unwrapping began like a symphony. Squeals, gasps, paper flying in all directions. New gadgets, sparkly accessories, designer jackets. The cousins cheered for each other, showing off gifts like trophies. Ella clapped too, for every child. Each unwrapping got a cheer from her as if it were their birthday. But then the mountain of boxes began to shrink. 10 gifts, then 7, then 3. Still nothing for Ella. I saw it before she said anything. The slight shift in her posture, the way her hands curled tighter in her lap. And then her voice so soft I almost didn't catch it. Did Grandma forget mine? I didn't answer right away. My eyes scanned the tree again, hoping something would magically appear. Maybe it's still back there, I said, already standing up trying to make my lie sound lighthearted. I turned toward Margot. Hey, I said carefully, keeping my voice even. Is there one for Ella that maybe didn't make it out here? Margot didn't flinch, didn't pretend to think. She just gave me a look, annoyed, not confused. Like I'd interrupted the flow, like I'd broken an unspoken rule. Then she looked at Ella, right at her, and with a voice as crisp and unbending as winter air, she said, "She's not really family." The words landed like a slap. And the room did nothing. It wasn't shocked silence. It was silence that had agreed in advance to stay still. One of the cousins began fiddling with the ribbon from their gift. Jenna, my sister-in-law, cleared her throat and busied herself collecting shredded wrapping paper. No one made eye contact. No one said anything. I turned to Ella. She didn't crumble. She didn't cry. She just blinked once slowly, like she was reviewing everything in her head and realizing she had misunderstood the rules of this game. Then she gave the smallest nod. That quiet, soul-shattering kind of nod that says, "I get it." Now I shouldn't have expected more. I dropped to my knees beside her. My hands trembled as I took hers. "You did nothing wrong," I whispered. She nodded again, her smile faint and brittle. "It's okay, Mommy. Maybe next year?" God, the way she said it, like she was the one trying to make me feel better. Across the room, Caleb sat frozen, his fists clenched on his thighs, jaw-tight gaze fixed on his mother. He didn't speak, didn't move, as if he was holding himself in place so he wouldn't explode. And I waited desperately for someone to step in to say, "Margot, that was cruel," or "Ella is family," or just, "That's not okay." But no one did. And my fury spread, not just at Margot, but at every adult who let that moment pass without challenge. Every person who chose the comfort of the status quo over the discomfort of truth. I wanted to grab Ella and leave. Right then, I wanted to make a scene so loud no one could pretend not to hear it. But I didn't. I sat paralyzed, my brain spinning with calculations. Would it hurt Ella more to see me lash out? Would it help anything to confront Margot here? Would Caleb resent me for going head-to-head with his mother in front of the whole family? And in that stillness, I betrayed my daughter. Afterward, the day moved on like nothing had happened. The kids resumed their play. Adults went back to sipping cider, scrolling their phones. The hum of normalcy returned like a fog settling over everything, but not for Ella. She disappeared into a quiet corner of the room, curling up with Leo, her teddy bear shoulders hunched, face unreadable. She didn't ask about the gift. She didn't ask why. She just kept that tiny practiced smile on her face, the one that told the world I'm okay, so it wouldn't have to deal with her pain. But I wasn't okay, not even close. Something ignited in me that morning. Not a spark, but a cold, steady fire. The kind that doesn't roar. The kind that waits. And that fire would not go out. At the time, I didn't realize Caleb had already made up his mind. He had seen enough, heard enough, felt enough. And he wasn't going to let that moment, that silence, stand untouched. Not another day, not another minute. That night, the house was quiet in the wrong kind of way. The festive glow had dimmed, laughter had faded into polite tension. After the last dish was stacked, the last wine glass rinsed, the obligatory hugs exchanged. Caleb and I retreated to our guest room in silence, the kind of silence where everything was brimming beneath the surface. Ella was already in her pajamas, soft fleece with tiny polar bears, the ones she picked herself on our Target trip last month. She lay curled up under the comforter with Leo, her stuffed bear tucked under her chin like a secret. She didn't ask for a bedtime story, didn't ask to call Santa or read The Night Before Christmas. She just lay there, wide-eyed, tracing the patterns on the ceiling with her gaze. I sat on the edge of the bed and gently rubbed her back in slow circles until her breath softened. Then in the smallest voice she whispered, "Mom." "Yeah, baby. Do you think maybe she didn't know I was coming?" My throat tightened. I swallowed hard, the words like shards. No, sweetheart, she knew. Oh, a pause, then almost hopeful. Maybe she just doesn't know me yet. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. My voice barely held. That might be it. But listen to me, it's not your fault. None of this is because of you. She nodded, turned her face into the pillow, and said nothing else. I stayed there a moment longer, brushing her hair back, trying to memorize the curve of her cheek, the way her breath fluttered against the pillowcase. Then I stood and saw Caleb. He was leaning in the doorway, one hand holding something, an envelope. His face was unreadable, but his presence filled the room. He didn't speak right away. He looked at Ella, then at me, then finally down at what he was holding. "I'm done," he said quietly. The steadiness in his voice sent a ripple through me. I've let my mom say a lot over the years. I let it slide for the sake of peace, but not this, not with Ella. I didn't move. I had never seen him like that. Not angry, not trembling, but solid. Certain. As if some internal line had finally snapped and all the pieces had clicked into place. "What is that?" I asked. He stepped forward and handed it to me. A manila folder. Plain, unassuming, heavy with intention. Inside were notarized legal documents, an updated will, formal adoption records, trust declarations. Caleb had added Ella to everything. Our home, our savings, his life insurance, the family trust. Not just words of love, but legal proof of belonging. "She's not just our daughter in our hearts," he said. "She's our daughter everywhere that matters. The law, the paperwork, the legacy, she's in all of it." I stared at him, hands shaking slightly. "You did this?" "I started it months ago," he said quietly. "Just in case I hoped I'd never need to use it, but I wanted to be ready if my mom ever crossed the line." I sat down on the bed, knees suddenly soft. "So what now?" He glanced at the clock, midnight. He put on his coat. "I'm going to show her who Ella is, not who she thinks she is." I didn't stop him. I didn't try to reason. I just nodded and watched him leave. The front door creaked open, then shut behind him with a finality I hadn't expected. I don't know what Margot thought when she saw him standing at her door unannounced in the dead of night. Maybe she was expecting a confrontation or a guilt-laced lecture, but she wasn't expecting the envelope. He sat across from her at the same kitchen table where she'd sliced Christmas pie hours earlier. His voice was calm, measured. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I'm not here to ask for anything." He slid the folder across the table. "I'm here to give you a choice." Margot opened it. Caleb watched as her eyes scanned the contents. "This," he said, "is Ella's name in every document that matters, every place that counts. She's my daughter, period." Then came the moment that broke through years of avoidance. "If you want to pretend she's not family, that's your choice. But if that's the choice you make, then you don't get to be my mother anymore, because I will not raise my daughter in a family that treats her like she's a guest." She tried to interrupt, Margot always did, but he held up his hand. He told her about the way Ella clapped for her cousins, how she hugged Margot without hesitation, how she whispered in bed wondering what she did wrong. Then he said, "You've got one shot to fix this one, because next Christmas we'll be somewhere else." Then he stood up, took his coat, and walked out. When he returned to our room, he didn't say much, just slid off his coat, climbed into bed beside me, and reached for my hand. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the same ceiling. Ella had thoughts spiraling. All the times I had bitten my tongue, all the moments I let my silence feel like agreement. But something shifted inside me, something solid. From that point forward, neither of us would let silence be our default. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, Caleb and I weren't just partners. We were parents, unified, resolute. the kind who would not let a quiet cruelty go unchecked. The next morning you could feel it in the air. The house wasn't calm, it was stiff. Careful, everyone walked around like they were avoiding cracks in the floor. They didn't know what had happened, but they knew something had. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, Ella sat at the kitchen table, her small hands wrapped around a warm mug of hot chocolate that Caleb had made her just the way she liked it. Extra marshmallows, a pinch of cinnamon. She stirred it slowly, not drinking it, just watching the little swirls form and fade. She was humming a tune under her breath, something she must have made up on the spot, quiet and tentative, like a thought she hadn't decided to say out loud yet. Her eyes were clearer than they had been the night before, but still heavy with something no child should have to carry. I was just about to ask if she wanted to bundle up and go for a walk, get some air, maybe find a squirrel or two to name when a soft knock broke the stillness. The guest room door creaked open. It was Margot, but not the Margot we knew, not the woman in designer sweaters and pearl earrings, the one who moved through rooms like she was being watched. That morning she looked smaller, like something in her had wilted. The tension in her shoulders was gone, replaced by something quieter, exhaustion, maybe humility. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. Caleb didn't answer. His back was straight, arms crossed, unreadable. I nodded. Margot stepped inside slowly, like a guest in her own house. In her hands was a box wrapped in silver paper. No ribbon, no tag, just simple, unadorned. She walked to Ella, knelt beside her, and placed the box on the table in front of her. "I forgot this yesterday," she said softly. Ella didn't move. She looked at the box, then at Margot. Her fingers gripped her mug just a little tighter. The silence stretched between them. Margot cleared her throat. Her voice, when it came again, was low and stripped of all the usual polish. "I made a mistake," she said, "a big one, and I'm sorry I was wrong." She wasn't looking at me, not at Caleb, she was looking at Ella. I let something in my head tell me that family is only about blood. But that's not true. Family is about love, and you've loved me from the very start more than I deserved, and certainly more than I gave you. Ella's eyes flicked to me, searching. I gave her a small, encouraging nod. With careful hands, she reached for the box and peeled back the wrapping. Inside was a set of professional-grade watercolor paints, the kind I'd always hesitated to buy because they were too expensive, too serious. Beneath it was a brand-new sketchbook, pages thick and untouched. And on top, a small white envelope. She opened the card and read it to herself. Her lips moved silently, eyes scanning slowly. Then she looked back at Margot. "Do you want me to draw you something?" Margot's eyes welled with tears. "I'd like that very much." Ella nodded once, no dramatic pause, no big grin, just a quiet, almost cautious agreement. "Okay," she said, and that okay felt like a small doorway opening. When Margot left the room, Caleb sat down beside me. He didn't look triumphant. There was no victory in his expression, just a quiet weariness and a long exhale. "You think this will last?" I asked. He shrugged, looking at the place where Ella had unwrapped the gift. "I don't know, but it's a beginning." That night, after the house had gone quiet again, Ella curled up on her bed with her sketchbook and paints. She drew something. She didn't say, what didn't ask for feedback, but when she showed it to us, I felt my throat tighten. It was a picture of a little girl, clearly Ella, standing between a man and a woman holding their hands. Behind them was a house, a tree with falling leaves, and above it all, a sun smiling down from the corner of the page. She had written one word at the bottom in wobbly letters, home. She handed the drawing to Caleb and leaned into his chest. He kissed the top of her head. "That's exactly what we are," he whispered. A few days after we returned home, as the dust of Christmas settled, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just Margot's tidy cursive on the front. Inside was an old photograph, Caleb at 5 years old, clutching his mother's hand with a wide grin on his face. On the back she had written, "Family is who you fight for. I see that now. Thank you for fighting for her. I didn't expect a miracle. I still don't." Margot hasn't transformed into someone she's not. She's still who she is, proud, particular, shaped by a world that didn't leave much room for redefinition. But she met the line we drew and didn't step over it. She looked at it, saw what it meant, and made a choice. And that choice changed everything. Because when someone finally sees your child not as someone to accommodate, but someone to cherish, something lifts. A weight you didn't even know you were carrying begins to dissolve. That Christmas didn't end in dramatic music or a perfect family photo. It ended with a paintbrush in Ella's hand, and a grandmother trying to learn how to be one, and somehow that was enough. We didn't say much on the drive back home. Not because there was tension, there wasn't. It was because peace had finally settled over us. Not the performative kind that covers up the cracks, but the real kind. The kind that arrives after a storm has passed through and left you standing not untouched, but intact. Changed stronger. Ella fell asleep halfway through the drive, her sketchbook resting open on her lap, one hand still holding her colored pencil. The hum of the car and the soft rustle of pages were the only sounds. At one point, I looked back and saw the picture she had drawn before we left, 3 figures, Caleb, me, and her, holding hands in front of a house. But this time, there was something new. A 4th figure, a woman with silver hair drawn just slightly apart from the trio. Close enough to be included, but not yet at the center. I didn't ask her who it was. I didn't have to. When we returned home, life moved forward in its usual rhythm. School resumed. Caleb went back to work. The tree was taken down, the ornaments packed away. And each afternoon, Ella sat at the kitchen table with her paints and her sketchbook, pouring quiet magic into page after page, foxes in teacups, trees full of singing birds, little girls with windswept hair, who always seemed to be chasing something just out of frame. One day she showed me a new drawing, a fox sitting upright at the table, one paw curled around a teacup, the other pointing at a paintbrush. I smiled and asked, "Who's that?" She grinned, lopsided, and knowing, "That's Grandma," she said she's learning. And that line, "she's learning," stuck with me more than anything. Not because it meant Margot had changed overnight. She hadn't. She still stumbled over the right words, still hesitated before hugging Ella too tightly. But she was trying, and Ella, in her quiet, open-hearted way, had left the door just wide enough for that effort to matter. Even after being overlooked, even after being made to feel invisible, Ella chose to leave a crack in the wall she could have sealed shut. She gave love one more chance to reach her. Children forgive in ways that defy adult logic. They don't weigh pride and history the way we do. They offer grace, like it's instinctive. And sometimes that grace is what allows healing to even begin. I still replay that moment in Margot's living room, her voice so sharp, the silence that followed even sharper, and my own failure to speak. I think about how many times I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than challenging the harm, that making things easy for everyone else somehow meant I was being strong. But that day carved something into me. Peace without truth isn't peace. It's performance. And performance cost Ella something she never should have had to question, not even for a second. Her place in this family, her certainty that she mattered, that's something I will never let slip again. Since that day, things have shifted, not dramatically, not instantly, but steadily. Margot calls more often now. She asks about Ella's art. She sends cards, small square ones with hand-drawn hearts or clumsy doodles that I know she spent hours perfecting. Sometimes there are misspelled words or awkward phrasing, but they're sincere. And sincerity at this point means more than perfection ever could. The last card she sent said, "I'm proud of the way you see the world. You've made mine wider, and that's enough for now." Not because we've erased what happened, but because we've stopped pretending it didn't. Now when Margot visits, she doesn't come with pretense or polished charm. She comes with effort, with questions, with her sleeves rolled up trying. And that effort, those inches she moves toward Ella, mean more than any glossy box with a shiny bow. For a long time, I used to believe that family meant biology or marriage or legal documents. I thought it was about who raised you, who you shared a last name with, who sat at the table year after year. But I've learned better. Family is who stands beside you when it matters, who looks at you fully and says, "You're mine." Not just once, but every time it counts, without conditions, without clauses. Sometimes it takes the quietest kind of courage to draw the line, and that's what Caleb did. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he didn't weaponize guilt. He stood still, he held the truth in his hands, and he let his mother decide which side of that truth she wanted to stand on. He didn't just protect our peace, he protected our daughter. He reminded me that action is love, that silence when used to avoid discomfort becomes cruelty in disguise, that standing up for someone doesn't always look like a fight. It can look like refusal. Refusal to pretend, refusal to let harm sit unchallenged. And Ella, our brave, luminous Ella, taught me what grace looks like in its purest form, Because even after everything she chose, softness. Not for Margot's sake, but for her own, because she knew something most grown-ups forget. Belonging shouldn't have to be earned, it should be given. And now finally she feels it. Not just from us, but from her grandmother too. So when people ask me how our Christmas went that year, I don't say it was perfect. I say it was the year something cracked and something beautiful crept in through the fracture. The year my daughter discovered that love isn't proven by being chosen, once it's proven by being chosen again and again when it matters most. Thank you for sitting with our story. If it stirred something familiar, if you've ever felt like Ella or like me, please know this. You're not alone. Family is complicated, but your worth never is. You deserve to be seen, to be claimed, to be held in full. And if you're raising a child, biological, adopted, fostered, or otherwise, don't ever let the world make them feel like a footnote. Speak. Draw the line. Choose them louder. If this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you took a second to like it. It helps others find their way here. And if you want to share your story, I'll be reading every word. Thank you for seeing Ella. Thank you for choosing kindness. Until next time, take care of yourself and the people you call family, the ones you fight for, the ones who choose you back.